People and dinosaurs lived together. I don't know if you've seen much of this, but I want to show it to you. I want to give thanks to these guys, or members of the church who wrote this book called Dinosaur Delusion, and also to a website that I used, called genesispark.com. I used several other sources, but these two I did go back to heavily, sort of to get an alignment of what I wanted to talk about this morning. And let's talk about that. Legends abounding in the histories of many peoples are accounts of great lizard-like beasts with which men have had to contend. Events involving these creatures have been recorded by explorers, historians, scholars, kings, and saints. We know such creatures existed. How do we know they existed? Well, duh, we find their bones all over the planet. We know they were huge. Man, it must have been something to run into one of these things. But you couldn't have done that because they haven't been around for millions of years. Well, maybe not. History says that they were contemporary with humans. Dragons. The word dinosaur was not invented until 1891, and so until dinosaur, that word was invented, people called them dragons. And you see writings about dragons throughout the recorded history of mankind, and in nearly every culture. It's just prolific how many dragons there are mentioned. You see any similarities between dragons and dinosaurs? Or dragons as you know them? What peoples have had dragon legends? Well, here are a few of the countries, not all of them. China, Japan, you might say, well, duh, China and Japan, they're all about dragons, but they're prolific there. They're prolific in other places as well. Nepal, Pacific Islands, Australia, African tribes talk about dragons and great lizard-like beasts. North American Indian tribes, many of those tribes talk about such beasts. South American cultures, Egypt, Ethiopia, Persia, India, Russia, Europe, and more specifically, these nations, England, France, Ireland, Switzerland, Scandinavia, Germany, Italy, Greece, all these nations, all these cultures have ancient legend stories about encounters humans had with dinosaur-like beasts. How in the world could that happen by accident or coincidence? I don't think it was accident. I don't think it was coincidence. Here's some of the more famous accounts. Chinese and Japanese lore, we know there's a bunch of them there. Dragon made St. George famous. You ever hear about St. George killing the dragon? We'll talk about a little more about that later. Beowulf. How many of you have had to read Beowulf in school? And you try to figure out what was that thing he killed? Well, if you look at the description of it, it sure sounds like a small T-Rex, perhaps. At any rate, he also killed a dragon that they called a dragon. Then there was the Babylonian Tiamat. Anybody read the Gilgamesh epic about the creation of the world? How this monster Tiamat was cut in half and its entrails pulled out, and that's what made the creation of the world. Maybe that's why things get so messy, because we're made out of guts from a big monster. But that creature had 4 legs, scales, it had wings. Sounds kind of like a dinosaur, or what the ancients would have called a dragon. The Greek hero Jason supposedly killed a dragon. Check your library, check the internet, you'll find stories about dragons all over the place and all through time. In every place where there are dragon legends, dinosaur remains have been found. Well, okay, dinosaur remains have been found everywhere on the planet. I was just reading about a recent discovery in Antarctica, and I thought, what are dinosaurs doing in Antarctica? Maybe the flood had something to do with that. I'm not sure. Only dogmatic insistence on evolutionary time frames keeps us from seeing that dinosaurs were the dragons of the ancient world. What's evolutionary time frame say? Billions and billions of years, and millions of years, and the dinosaurs were so far back in history that no person ever had any relationship with them whatsoever, except for perhaps some Indians in Canada and the northern U.S. The Unktehi, a creature well known to the Ojibwa tribesmen of Ontario, Canada, as well as the Sioux of the Northwestern Plains, is pictured right here. Now, a lot of young people, kids who like dinosaurs, can probably look at that and say, that looks like an Ankylosaurus. That's pretty good size. Let me get my pointer here. I'll show you a picture of an Ankylosaurus in a minute. But there's the creature. He's got a head that looks like he's got some pretty good horns on it. He's got spines on his back and down his tail. This is a canoe with some tribesmen in it that are apparently attacking. What are these? Those look like large serpents. I mean, in relation to the canoe, they look like pretty good size. Let's see what else we got here. Henry Rose Schoolcraft. He was a geologist. He was an Indian agent. He studied the Sioux and wrote down things from the Sioux that they told him and showed him. And he wrote down or drew these 2 drawings, reproduced them actually from pictures that were on birch bark that the Sioux had. And they had drawn pictures of this beast that they were familiar with. This is from 1850, pictures made by the Sioux Indians on birch bark. Notice the similarity. Here is a picture of an Ankylosaurus. Doesn't that critter look like the picture? Go back here. See the similarity there? That looks like the same kind of a critter. That's an Ankylosaurus right there. We know that that critter existed. We find his remains. Guess where we find them? We find them in places where people met the young Tehi. Here's just one Ica ceremonial burial stone from the Nazca culture in Peru from 100 BC to about 800 AD. What do you see on here? You see dinosaurs. There's a long-necked dinosaur. We call them sauropods. I'll use that word later. You'll see it again. Like a Diplodocus, or it used to be called a Brontosaurus, and now there's a big controversy over whether the Brontosaurus actually existed, and they changed his name to a Pterosaurus. But there were a bunch of these kinds of dinosaurs, and I know I cried too, because this is a violent picture. That guy sitting on his back is killing that apatosaur or sauropod, whatever we're going to call him, with his spear, and it looks like there's another dinosaur attacking the guy who's attacking the dinosaur. But that's one of thousands of stones with depictions of dinosaurs. Here's another one. By the way, what I'm looking at up here, another discovery of dermal spines reveals a new look for sauropod dinosaurs. When was that written? 1992. That's when that was written by this fella, Stephen Zerkis. They uncovered remains of dinosaurs that had dermal spines, and they didn't know they had that before. Now, if you're an old guy like me and you grew up looking at pictures of dinosaurs when you were a kid, they didn't have any of those dermal spines. They were all smooth. The big Brontosaurus, the Diplodocus, the Apatosaurus, whatever you saw, just had a smooth back because that's how they thought they were. And then they uncovered evidence that they had these dermal spines. Well, look what's on this critter here. Aren't those dermal spines? Did the people who made this stone, who carved this animal in stone, know more about what those animals look like than we do, or did, before dermal spines were discovered by modern scientists? It's interesting to me that in the thousands of these stones, there are depictions of animals that now look like what we thought they would have looked before. Here's a whole bunch of dinosaurs. This is a menagerie of dinosaurs. That looks like a Brontosaurus there. That might be, should have looked at it a little quick, might be a T-Rex or an Allosaurus. What's that? Triceratops. You guys know what that is. What's that? Stegosaurus. And that might be a Dimetrodon. See how many dinosaur names you guys know? That's pretty cool, isn't it? Why is that? We like dinosaurs. They're interesting to us. You ever heard of the Ankylosaurus figurines? Now, I'll admit there's controversy about this. And, hey, do you believe the Bible's from God? Duh. Is there any controversy about that? Are there any detractors? Are there any people saying, oh, that Bible's not from God? Well, sure. Anytime you come up with something that you're going to say refutes the assumed politic of millions and billions of years, somebody's going to say, they're going to figure out a way to say that it's bogus. So there is some controversy about these, but the evidence I've looked at say, yeah, these things are legitimate. These things were discovered in 1945 by Waldemar Jules Rudd in Acambara, Mexico. Interestingly enough, what do you see here? Aren't those the dermal spines? Remember that thing we looked at just a minute ago that said those dermal spines are pretty new discoveries by modern scientists, and yet whoever made these before 1945 knew that those critters, some of them anyway, had dermal spines. There are about 2,600 of these figurines that depict dinosaurs, but it's not just depictions of dinosaurs. Whoops, missed one there. There's a couple more of them. Here's another one. By the way, there's another one with dermal spines that we didn't really know about until late in the 20th century, and these were discovered in 1945. So how many of these are there? I think it might be on the next slide. Nope. Oh, there's St. George. We can't talk about St. George yet. We're not there yet. See, how many of these were there? Like 33,000 of them. 2,600 depicted dinosaurs, but the balance of them depicted things like musical instruments and just household items. And some of them were considered to be votives. In other words, like household idols that people might use to worship in their own home or have a little representative, like people have a cross in their home today. People might have had an idol in their home, a small one that they would have looked to venerate whatever God they believed in. But among those thousands, there were 2,600 that looked like dinosaurs. Why would they have made those if they didn't know what they looked like? Okay, here's St. George. He's killing a dragon. Nearly all depictions depictions that are ancient. The old ones, and this goes back to the 10th and 11th centuries. It's probably about when this story came to light, the legend, we'll call it, came to light. But all the old ones show George killing a dragon that's about this size or smaller, which is interesting to me. Because if I was fantasizing about a dragon, if I was just making up a dragon to tell a big fanciful story, what kind of dragon would you create? I want a big dragon. I want a dragon, instead of George looking down off his horse like this, he'd be going, oh, that's a big old dragon. That's how I would do it, just because I want the story to really relate if I'm making it up along the way. But if I'm not making it up, if I'm telling about an animal that actually existed, I might show something more like this. By the way, I think I already mentioned it, but I want to mention it again. When you go back and look at the old representations of George killing the dragon, all those dragons are pretty small. A lot of them smaller than this guy. Most depictions, like the one you just saw, by the way, that one was from Barcelona, Spain. They look similar to this guy. This was an actual dinosaur, the Nazca. Doesn't that look like a Nazca to you? That looks like, could be the same creature. How did they get that creature to look so close and resemble it so much? By the way, this legend starts out with the Crusaders going down, and they went to this town where there was a lake and found out that this monster, this dragon, was coming out of the lake and terrifying everybody, and so they would appease it by taking a couple of sheep every day and feed this monster. And then they ran out of sheep, and so they took the local king's daughter to feed her to the monster, and thought, well, maybe that'll appease this critter. And of course, the knight rode by, and he saw what was happening, and he killed the monster. Actually, he didn't kill it at first. He just ran his spear through it, the legend says. And then they took the girl's girdle, not the girdle, but the thing that bound up the middle part of her clothing, and wrapped it around his neck, and they led him back into town. That's the story. You can read about it yourself. But the bottom line is, they got a creature that looks like what we now know is a real dinosaur. Guess where these fossils are found? They're found in all the same places where this story has proliferated. And it started supposedly in northern Africa. And this depiction that I just showed you a minute ago, that was, remember, in Barcelona, Spain, all the way over to Georgia in what present-day Russia. What are these? These are decorations that you find on several French chateaus from the Middle Ages to the 1500s. These are called salamanders, and they supposedly breathe fire. We'll talk more about breathing fire in a little bit. But these creatures were carved into chateaus, as I understand it, for good luck, because these creatures were supposed to be impervious to fire since they breathe fire, and maybe it was that they were carved into houses so that the place would be impervious to fire. I'm not sure about that, but they're pretty prolific. They're all over the place. There's different representations of them, and that is a baryonyx. That's a creature that looks a lot like these guys, and looks a lot like these guys. Where do you find fossils of the baryonyx? Where do we know that they must have been in all the same places where you find these chateaus? Isn't it interesting? Now, is it possible that all these people who are recreating images of dinosaurs just found their fossils and put them all together and said, yep, we're going to create a story based on this fossil? I guess it's possible, but is it probable? Keep looking at the evidence, and it stacks up to look like, I don't know if that could have been the reason. China is proliferated with dragon legends. Is it simply a coincidence that China is also proliferated with dinosaur fossils? When you start looking at pictures of dinosaur fossils, so many times you're going to see where that fossil comes from is someplace in China or Mongolia. There are just dinosaur fossils all over the place, and it just so happens that's where the dragon legends also persist. This is an interesting looking dragon. You see a lot of dragons like this. And we'll get to this in a minute, but I just want to bring it to your attention now, kind of a little preview. How did Satan appear to Adam and Eve? He was a serpent. There was a serpent in the garden. What was part of his punishment? That from then on, he would go on his belly in the dust of the earth. So perhaps Satan, as he appeared to Adam and Eve at first, whatever that form was he appeared in, was said to be a serpent, said to have legs. Can you imagine if the legs were taken from this guy, he would just look like a big snake. It's interesting how some of these accounts are kind of interwoven. And we look at this, and with today's 21st century education about evolution, we think, oh, that's crazy, Marty. You're a madman up there telling us that maybe all this stuff is actual history. Well, I don't know. This stuff is all over the place, and it makes sense to see it in light of the evidence of history. China's neighbor, Nepal, has its temple called the Muktinath Temple, and it boasts 108 dragon-headed fountains. They don't call them dinosaurs, they call them dragons. One of those heads is this. That's the sculpture that is the fountain. You can kind of see the water coming out there. I think that's what that is. But what does that look like if not a Triceratops head? And interestingly enough, you might look at this and say, well, this Triceratops head doesn't have horns like that one does. And I don't know if perhaps they were broken off or maybe they were never there. But I was reading an article just a couple of weeks ago that talked about what they're determining now about the ceratopsian dinosaurs, that perhaps they didn't have horns until they were very mature. Younger ones might have not had the horns, and then they grew out later, like a lot of species do. They develop things over time. Or perhaps it was that the females did not have the horns. Now, I think they got that backwards. But at any rate, that's okay, that took a little while, but anyway. So it may well be that that is a ceratopsian just like this is, except maybe the Chinese actually saw it and rendered this one a little more accurately. So, is this coincidence that they just happen to make dragon heads that look like the actual thing? I find that kind of hard to believe. Cambodia. What's the creature carved into that stone look like? What's that look like to you? Doesn't it look like a stegosaurus? Looks like a stegosaurus to me. This is from an 800-year-old temple in Cambodia. This carving is one of many others that depict monkeys, deer, buffalo, lizards, parrots, animals that they would have seen, and they would, well, here's an animal, let's carve that into here. Here's an animal, let's carve that monkey, let's carve that buffalo, let's carve this stegosaurus in here. Why would they have put that with the other animals if to them it wasn't just like one of the other animals? How could they have known what a stegosaurus looked like if they'd never seen one? Next picture is of a young man. This young man is a friend of a preacher friend of mine. He's standing next to this temple, so you can kind of get an idea of the size of it, being in the background, and it's 800 years old. That's not that old. But there it is. English dragons to the right. This, what you're seeing here, is a tomb. This is in the church of Carlisle Cathedral, and this fella, Bishop Richard Bell, was buried there in 1496. There are brass inlays that bear engravings of various known creatures such as dogs, pigs, and weasel, and so on. But in addition to the normal animals, they've got depictions of what appear to be sauropods. This is in that engraving from 1495. Is that right, 1495? Yeah, that's not the 1496. Okay, so they upped it 1 year. Between that time I changed slides there. How do they know to make those accurate representations of those animals? By the way, you see what these guys are doing? They're holding their tails aloft. Now, if you're an old guy like me, I'll go back to that. You remember the picture of the Brontosaurus from years ago? They thought the Brontosaurus drug his tail behind him. And then as they kept uncovering the tracks of these animals, they found out, well, there's no mark in the ground where he drug his tail, so he must have held his tail aloft. But these guys in 1496 got that right in their artistic representation. How did they know to do that? Interesting. Maybe they saw a couple of them. There are multiple British dragon legends. This lady, Jacqueline Simpson, mentions in her book British Dragons from 1980 that over 70 villages in Great Britain have legends and traditions involving dragons. And those are just the traditions we know about. From Mesopotamia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, over that part of the world, this relief, what's that look like? Well, that looks like that. That's a picture of an apatosaur or a diplodocus. Yeah. Ask a 6-year-old, he'll know what that is. Looks just like these. and that's from Mesopotamia. It's about 3,000 years old. It's a cylinder seal. They would have created a document, folded it, or somehow sealed it up, and they would have put wax on it and rolled this cylinder seal over it, and that cylinder seal would have left this imprint in that wax. They would have known that that was an official document. So are we to assume that it's just mere coincidence that whoever created these depictions of dinosaurs just accidentally, coincidentally, got it right to look like the actual thing? I think that's a lot to presume. The Anasazi Indians. Anybody like beans? The beans, Anasazi are famous for their beans. They're also famous for this dinosaur. Carving at the left is found at the Kachina Bridge and the Natural Bridge Monument of Utah. You can go there and you can look at it yourself. As a matter of fact, I remember reading about somebody being there, and along with this carving of what appears to be an Apatosaurus or a Brontosaurus, some kind of a sauropod, there were other animals like buffalo and antelope, and they were asked, now what's that there? Oh, that's an antelope. And they point to the other thing. What's that? Oh, that's a buffalo. And then they point to this, and what's that? She, I don't know what that is. Well, how could you not know what that is? Any 6-year-old knows what that is. The remains of both of these animals have been found in the region. Oh, I'm sorry. The ibex and the woolly mammoth are also pictured there as well. That's the second dot point. I should read my own material, shouldn't I? The remains of both of these animals, the ibex and the mammoth, have been found in that region, though the animals themselves have not been present for many years. But the remains of sauropods are also found in that area. In other words, the fossil evidence is there to show that these animals probably inhabited this part of the world, and there are drawings of them in that area that give us the idea that people saw them and knew how to recreate them in art. This petroglyph was discovered in 2012 in New Mexico near Hidden Mountain just outside of Los Lunas. It's on an isolated, nearly inaccessible ledge near a very clear deer petroglyph. In other words, people were just drawing pictures of what they saw out in the wilderness. They saw a deer, they draw a picture, saw a buffalo, saw an ibex, saw a woolly mammoth, they draw those things. Okay, we believe all those existed with men, but what about that animal? What's that look like? Looks like a sauropod to me, but they drew it along with the others. This artifact was left by the Mississippian culture from 800 to 1500 AD through what's now the southwest U.S. What were they depicting if not a sauropod dino? Now, the discoverers and the researchers think that this symbol, what's that look like to you? That looks like it might be water. They believe that was put on here to indicate that this was an animal that lived near or around water. By the way, what do you see there? An aloft tail. It wasn't dragging the ground, it was held aloft. Maybe this is pictured as a juvenile, but at any rate, where did they get the idea to make a creature that looked like that? This marvelous piece of Mesoamerican pottery was made by the Mississippi Caddo Indians. We got a Caddo princess right here. Where are you, Yanavea? Woohoo! There she is. She is a Caddo princess. Her ancestors probably made this. Is this the image of a baby daughter? Sorry, I got it on the brain. Baby dinosaur fashioned into a handle. You see this? Doesn't that look like a sauropod infant? There's the tail going down there, blended into the jar, and there's the legs. How did they know to make a creature that looked like that? I mean, if you wanted to make a crocodile or an alligator, the body would have been much more slender, I would think, because they're all pretty skinny, but this is not skinny. That's interesting, the way that is made. In England, there are images of sauropod-like creatures engraved on a tomb from 1496. The Mesopotamian artifact from 3000 BC bears images of sauropod-like creatures. Native Americans created images of sauropod-like creatures 500 to 1500 years ago. Coincidence? How did all these cultures, separated by all these miles and all these years, how did they get it right? What makes more sense? Ancient people in several diverse cultures, divided by thousands of miles and many hundreds of years, coincidentally created images of creatures that are not only similar to each other, but match modern depictions in museums today. Or, the ancient humans saw the creatures and simply recreated what they saw. I know which one makes more sense to me. Israeli dragons. What are these dinosaur-like creatures depicted on an ancient synagogue in El Kanatir in what is now the Golan Heights? What are those? Does that look maybe like a juvenile T-Rex or an Allosaur or something like that? Maybe even one of the Spinosauruses that they found? What's that? That's a pretty big meat-eating something right there, I'll tell you, because that looks like a horse, maybe even with a saddle on it, or perhaps a donkey. I think it's more like a horse, but at any rate, something's eating it. How did they know to depict creatures like that? Because what's that look like? That looks like a T-Rex. If you've seen Jurassic Park, you know that. Is that strange to see something like that on an Israeli synagogue? The serpent, we already mentioned him. He must have originally had legs. How about the great Leviathan mentioned in Job 3:8, Psalm 104:26, and Isaiah 27:1? The flying serpents of Isaiah 14:29-36. The book Bel and the Dragon. Now, you may not be familiar with Bel and the Dragon because it's apocryphal. That means it's not inspired of God, but it's a Jewish source. And it's named Bel and the Dragon. Where'd they get that dragon? The great dragon of the Revelation, chapter 12, verse 9. The Illini Indians of Illinois. If you ever wonder, why did they call that state Illinois? Well, take a guess. That's where the Illini Indians were from. They told about the piasa, the bird that devours man. It lived in a cave and it killed a lot of people. And they killed it. A young man with a bow and arrow killed it because that creature had killed his family. The Pima Indians of southern Arizona. We're going from Illinois to Arizona. This report from the explorer Captain Juan Mateo Manji with the Jesuits, Eusebio Francisco Kino and Adamo Gil. So you got people with names and authoritative references who are going to these places and hearing these stories, and they're reporting on them. And they're talking about this story that the Pimas told them about two great flying monsters that ate people, just like the one in Illinois. One lived in a cave and was killed by asphyxiation when the Indians built a fire at the mouth of the cave. The other was killed in similar fashion after it had inhabited a pueblo. The Yaqui Indians of southern Arizona have a similar legend of their own. There's a picture of a Quetzalcoatlus. That's a representation. Apparently this one owned a car. So, I bet he had a sunroof. What do you think? At any rate, these critters, it's so far the largest of the pterosaurs whose remains have been found in many areas of the United States. Now, what does that mean when we say it's the largest of the ones that have been found? You think we found the largest one? Maybe not. I would think there's probably some bigger ones out there. Some guy goes into the woods and kills a big buck and drags it out and says, oh, that's got to be the biggest one that ever lived. Well, no, probably not. Maybe this is not the largest one. Maybe they just found one and they're basing his size, this scale, on what they found, and there might even been bigger ones. We know they lived in places where these accounts of flying monsters have originated. Is it just coincidence? That's a lot to say is coincidence. Who etched into a wall of the Grand Canyon what appears to be an image of an Edmontosaurus? The image to the right is of a rock carving overlaid with an outline to enhance its appearance. That's the outline right there. Fossilized remains of these creatures have been found in this area as well. Is that a coincidence? Now, hold on a minute. If you were going to draw a picture and just fake it, would you draw that? That looks like his neck got to the top and just lost it. Just flipped right over. If I was drawing something on a canyon wall I wanted people to see and think was a dinosaur, I'd have a big old head, teeth, and I'd have people in that mouth. I'd make it pretty good. I don't think I'd draw that, but somebody drew it. Why did they draw that? I think they drew it because that's what they saw. It's an awful coincidence that it looks like that creature that we know existed. Here's a question, but it's going to be qualified. Knowing that huge reptilian creatures did exist in the past, and knowing that there are multiple and varied legends and accounts, and knowing that there is an abundance of artwork in the form of carvings, statues, paintings, drawings, weavings, engravings, etc. that depict such creatures, and knowing that these accounts accurately describe what we know are dinosaur-like creatures, and knowing that these accounts are universal in nature and not unique to a few cultures or even continents or time frames, is it not foolish to casually dismiss these accounts as merely the stuff of fantasy and imagination? Just seems like there's got to be more to it than that with all of this abundance of evidence. Soft tissues from a T-Rex fossil. Somebody was talking to me about this just before the lesson. For more than a century, the study of dinosaurs has been limited to fossilized bones, and now researchers have recovered 70-million-year-old soft tissue. By the way, this is a quote. I would not have written 70-million-year-old soft tissue. Now just think about that. Try to wrap your mind around that. 70-million-year-old soft tissue. How possible do you think that is? How long does stuff last in your Tupperware? I don't know. And this is from an article. It's a scientific article. They found soft tissue, and they're doing research on it. This is what scientists are saying. Schweitzer said that after removing the minerals from the specimen, the remaining tissues were soft and transparent and could be manipulated with instruments. The bone matrix was stretchy and flexible, she said. Also, there were long structures like blood vessels. What appeared to be individual cells were visible. She's not a preacher. She's not a theologian. She's a scientist, and she's saying we have broke open this T-Rex bone, and look what we found, soft tissue. John Horner of the Museum of the Rockies at Montana State University said that the discovery is a fantastic specimen, but probably is not unique. Other researchers might find similarly preserved soft tissues if they split open the bones in their collection. You know, that's interesting. If you find dinosaur bones that are intact, what's the last thing you want to do with them? You don't want to split them open, but if you do, what might you find? You might find soft tissue. Where's the science that shows us how they would preserve for 70 million years? I don't think there is any science that does that. Are we really being asked to believe that the soft tissues that are stretchy, flexible, and transparent have survived for 70 million years without fossiliting or disintegrating? That's what we're being asked to believe. Where's the science for that? I don't think there is any. Which takes more faith to believe that the tissues have been preserved intact or that they are much younger than previously believed. Behemoth, first of the ways of God. God tells Job about the behemoth. By the way, before he talks about the behemoth, he already talked to Job about 11 other animals that we would obviously concede exist and still exist. But now he talks to him about the behemoth. And he says, I made him just like I made you. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins and the power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. What modern animal can do that? Now, if you look at your Bibles, you might see over in the margin where it says that this animal was a hippopotamus. Have you ever seen a hippopotamus tail? That doesn't look like a cedar to me. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are bars of iron. He's speaking metaphorically, figuratively. If a river rages, he's not alarmed, apparently because he's so huge, like a brontosaurus. He can't be captured. Observations about the context of the behemoth text. Number one, God had previously asked Job about at least 10 different animals with which we are also familiar. Goats, deer, lions, oxen, donkeys, horses, as you can see there. The interrogation was based on the idea that Job was familiar with these creatures, and even with the familiarity, or with that familiarity, would have been unable to answer, and even with that familiarity, would have been unable. Do you know what that's supposed to say? He would have needed familiarity with that animal to understand what God was trying to say to him. If it was a fantasy creature, Job would have said, well, you're telling me about something that doesn't even exist. How does that make your point? It was something that Job had seen, is what I'm trying to say. And the description sounds just like one of these guys. Job had apparently seen one of those, knew what God was talking about. What about the Leviathan in Job chapter 41? God assumed Job's familiarity with this animal as well. He could not be caught with hooks or bound with cords. By the way, what animals in the world today cannot be caught or bound? I mean, they've been harpooning whales for centuries.
Ooh, my back.
He couldn't be made into merchandise. He couldn't be taken with a weapon. He had overwhelming strength. He was armored with scales. His teeth inspired terror. He sneezed fire and smoke. And if you look in the account of Job, Job describes the fire that came out of this beast in 4 different ways, 4 different times. It wasn't just a passing thing that he mentioned. He was feared by the mighty. He had irons like straw and bronze like rotten wood. And it's interesting, ancient accounts of animals encountered in Europe, they say the same thing. We shot arrows at it. They just bounced off. We threw spears. They just bounced off. He made the deep to boil. Leviathan have been a Spinosaurus, the apparent rival to Mr. T-Rex? That's a big dinosaur, and they believe this animal lived pretty much in water. This is the Spinosaurus. Here's another one over here depicted. Huge, about the same size as T-Rex. Some say a little bigger, but there's, looks like a little tiny T-Rex. Challenging. Hey, my daddy said he would whoop you. Did the Leviathan sneeze fire? People say, and I just heard it recently, no such thing as a fire-breathing animal. But really, how arrogant is it to say that since we've never seen an animal breathe fire, that there never has been one? That's pretty arrogant, isn't it? What if all the lightning bugs died and we tried to tell our grandchildren, you know, there used to be this little bug that come out in the evening and he would light up in the dark and we could see him? Oh, you're crazy. That never happened. What if somebody in South America said, we had these big eels that would come out, and if you touch them, they would shock you and give you a heart attack? Oh, that's crazy. I've never seen any creature that could do that. Hey, what about this little critter? He's not very big. He's about 2 millimeters, 30 millimeters in size. He produces hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide. And these are mixed in a combustion chamber with a catalyst, and when that happens, he expels hot gas, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, through a directional nozzle. He can shoot that wherever he wants it to go. When
You bet.
He can do that. If God can make a little beetle that can do that, what's the problem with making something as big as a Spinosaurus that can breathe fire? I don't think it would be that much of a challenge for God myself. Genesis says this, let the waters bring forth abundantly, and God made all the creatures that live in the waters. He made them in the creation. It says he made all the beasts of the earth in the creation. It was so. Exodus says, in 6 days the Lord God made the heavens, the earth, and sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. We're told by John, the apostle of Jesus, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, he was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him. So who made the dinosaurs? Jesus. Jesus made the dinosaurs. John is about to say in the 14th verse of this first chapter, the Word was made flesh and he dwelt among us. Jesus made the dinosaurs. Blank slate. Why? Why did I give this lesson? What's the whole point? If God tells us the truth about dinosaurs and the world doesn't, what's the lesson? Who should we be listening to? If the world is telling us, that Bible, you can't believe it. You can't believe in that God. You can't believe in dinosaurs. Well, in the first place, if there is no God, what's it matter what we believe? Might as well believe what we want. But if there is a God, the evidence points to this. If he was right about the dinosaurs, if he's right about creation, if he's right about the age of the earth, I think he's right about Jesus. And if he's right about Jesus, we all need to do something about that.